I bought the largest slab I've ever worked with to build a dining table, and unfortunately it was still too small. The good news is I have a few ideas to fix this issue, but the bad news is that I'm not too sure it's going to meet the expectations of my ridiculously high maintenance clients and their specific design requirements and needs.
No, I feel like I'm pretty open to whatever.
Okay, the must-haves honestly aren't that demanding, but I'm still making my brother help me because I need someone else's input to decide if this crazy design is creative or just plain dumb. Oh yeah! Today I learned that if you order slabs online, there's a chance that they're going to be delivered in a completely empty truck with one man and a pallet jack. And when I asked him if he minded if I filmed, he just sort of laughed and said, go for it, but this one's going to be a little bit tricky. That's because this was actually 3 slabs, but pretend you didn't see those first 2, because this is the one we want. At least I think it's the one we want. Maybe I should have a quick design meeting before I get ahead of myself.
This table has run its course because the kids have destroyed it with their crafts.
Yeah, this table is like all manufactured wood. It's not real. We've had this table for, I don't know, since we moved in, probably 5 years now, at least. And it's just not really quality. I'm not going to say where it's from, but it rhymes with Wayfair. And they've like created these fake grooves and stuff in it, and basically you'd have to go through the whole table with a toothpick if you wanted to get all the junk and the paint and things out of it.
You guys ran out of toothpicks, I can see.
Folks are sweating. So I definitely think we're ready to switch up to a round table.
Yeah. And darker or lighter colored wood?
Lighter.
Okay. Is there anything that you like about this table that you'd like to see in the new one?
The ability to have multiple people here. Have at least room for 6 people is kind of critical. Pretty worn out. I would say it's not like we've been easy on it. You know, our kids are 7 and 5 and they're kind of relentless on the table. But, you know, you could walk in here and there's just a bolt laying on the ground. This bench we're sitting on is completely wonky and wiggles and kind of feels like it might fall apart from under you. Making sure that it's like durable and it's got, you know, good strong materials that are easily cleaned is a big deal for us.
I like how we're tracking your heart rate while we do this. Is it up right now?
We're at 91.
Kids do all like their crafts and painting, and they make slime and they do Play-Doh, and then we have the annual bullfrog races on here, and then also when the barber comes to trim the guinea pig on the table. So just keeping up with that is almost impossible.
Do you want to say anything else about the table? Amelia?
About this table?
Yeah, about
Or the new
dining tables in general.
What do you want me to say?
I don't want you to say, I just, you know.
Do you guys have anything else?
Do you like dining tables?
Yeah.
Now that I know what I'm replacing and what I'm supposed to be replacing it with, I can start to think about the circular layout on this slab. And almost immediately my hands are tied because to seat 6 people with occasionally 8, you need at least a 60-inch diameter. And I don't. It's okay, that's what epoxy is for, right? I'm just kidding. Anyway, to start working with this slab, I need to cut it down to make it a more manageable size. And I'm being really careful here because I may need these offcuts later. Or not. Now that I have this thing cut down to a more workable, I don't know that I can even lift it by myself, so maybe I'll say a reasonable size, I can start to take some measurements and get a better understanding of how big of a piece I need to fill in the rest of this circle. It looks like I'm gonna need something that's about 56 by 20, and I know exactly what I'm going to do. Now, if you think that I'm just gluing up some boards and slapping them onto the side of the slab, well, you're mostly wrong. That would be way too easy. We're doing something much more ridiculous than that. And all epoxy jokes aside, I wanted to keep going down this path of alternatives to extend or make slabs larger. As much as I want to build the suspense to try to keep you guessing, I'll just tell you, it's a chaotic cutting board pattern. or I guess more of a chaotic butcher block pattern. If you aren't familiar with this pattern, it's basically a style used in making cutting boards where you take a bunch of strips of wood and glue them up in random patterns and widths and then cut them down a bunch of times and re-glue them together until the pattern is completely unpredictable. As I mentioned before, this is typically used for cutting boards, but I've actually experimented with different uses outside of that before. In fact, here's an example of a chaotic pattern that I used as drawer fronts a few projects back. But just know that honestly, this one's completely different. First off, this time I'm just using white oak, so the pattern itself will still be chaotic, but on a much larger scale, and there won't be such drastic contrasts because there aren't multiple species of wood. However, there are some pretty big challenges in doing this. Stick with me here because this is going to get a little bit technical, but it'll explain why I had to do this process the way that I'm doing it. When I first had this idea to try to attach a chaotic pattern butcher block to the side of a live edge slab, I mentioned it to my buddy Garrett, who works at Baker Hardwoods, and the first question he asked me was which side of the board I planned to be facing upward. And this didn't completely catch me off guard because I had already decided that unlike a typical cutting board, I didn't want the end grain to be facing up. But that actually wasn't why Garrett was asking me at all. What he was really getting at was the grain selection for the side of the board, the piece that would attach to the live edge. Now, if you're unfamiliar, there's really three types of edges on a board. There's the face grain, which is the two faces, the edge grain, which is, well, the edge, and then there's the end grain, which is the two ends. I don't know if I needed to explain that or not. Anyway, what you need to understand for now is that typically if you're going to glue up and attach two pieces, it's best if the orientation of the wood is the same. And the orientation of the slab that this needs to attach to is edge grain. Keep that in mind for now because as the glue dries, I've got to get started on the base. Your eyes did not just lie to you. This board basically just waved at you when I set it on the table. I tried to explain that just because I'm wearing black Vans doesn't mean that I'm here for the Warped Tour, but nonetheless, we have a very twisted board. Shout out to the 5 of you that got that reference. Anyway, I'm building a pedestal base for this table, and at the very bottom of that pedestal is two round pieces stacked on top of each other. The bottom one is going to be slightly larger, but you'll still only see about 1.5 inches of it. That said, instead of gluing up an entire panel that uses a lot of wood and is super heavy, I'm going to use the octagon trick. And now that I think about it, I don't really know if this is a trick. I don't know, it's a method of creating a circle. The idea is to take 8 pieces of perfectly cut, perfectly angled pieces of wood, glue them up into an octagon, and that gives you the least amount of waste when you go to cut out the circle. And the most important part, of course, being perfect cuts and perfect angles, which well, you know. With all 8 pieces of the octagon cut and ready for glue up, instead of using glue, it's back to the Total Boat High Performance Epoxy because once again, this is an in-grain glue up. And one of the key differences and sometimes advantages of working with epoxy instead of wood glue is the open time, which is basically just the amount of time you have before it dries or cures. Now, I'm not going to use any clamps on this. Instead, I'm just going to use tape around each of the edges to hold it in place. And once that's done, I can finally show you why I cut out these 2 notches in these pieces across from each other in the octagon. So first and foremost, the center stretcher is obviously going to act as support for the second disc, but it's also going to act as a center point for me to use my circle jig and cut the octagon into a circle. There are a few consistent themes that seem to keep popping up throughout this project. And the first is using epoxy on in-grain joints, which by itself isn't that weird, but I rarely ever do it, and it seemed to keep happening. I'll explain more about that when it pops up again, but check out this octagon turning into a circle. Whew, that took forever, but I finally have a circle, and let me tell you, I paid for it because the only thing worse than being covered in sawdust is being covered in sawdust and sweat. And it is June in Texas here and the humidity is crazy, but I'm happy to tell you that this is the last time that I will sweat in this shop because thank you to Della, I was able to install a mini split, and now I'll have air conditioning in the summer and heat in the winter. All right, now that I'm cleaned up and the mini split is cranking, it's time to get started on the second layer of this base. The second disc is gonna sit directly on top of this first one with one big difference. It's gonna be a full panel, which means that I have to mill and cut down all the pieces before I can glue them up and cut a second circle. While this process and circle is slightly different, I think the question needs to be asked. Do we really need to watch it again? And I can answer it for you because I know what happens. Yes, we need to watch it again. Go. Well, that's not great. I don't know how bad it is. It doesn't look that bad. It's definitely going to be fixable. But the router bit just came loose from the router. This whole time I've been kind of debating with myself and thinking that I should give the router a rest and use my jigsaw to cut this out to make it easier. And I guess that decision has been made for me now. All right, there's always a little bit of drama in every project. That one obviously was not that big of a deal. I just ended up having to do it slightly different than I had planned. Getting past that small challenge, I can now turn my attention back to the chaotic pattern where the glue has dried, and surely cutting these one more time will go smoothly. Just as I'm going to turn on the table saw to do the first vertical cuts on all these, and my dust collection won't turn on. You can actually hear my remote trying to click on. And for whatever reason, the last 2 times that I turned this on, there was some weird clicking noises and it tripped my breaker twice. So this is about to get really messy. Sometimes it's the really small stuff that you just need to work that can aggravate you the most. And this particular moment was one of those for me. I know these types of things are not isolated in woodworking or furniture building, and the comment section can sometimes be a little scary, but I'd love for you to share how you stay positive in these moments. Oh, that is not going to work. You can't tell, but there's just a haze in the entire garage. I'm gonna have to find a solution for this. Ugh. One of the many problems to this chaotic pattern is this second glue up. Usually on butcher block or a cutting board, the sides of the wood that you're gonna glue up are usually the edges or the faces, and rarely ever the end grain. Because gluing up end grain to end grain causes a lot of problems, mainly because the end grain on wood is pretty porous and the glue will just seep in there and not do a great job of joining to the other face. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different, which is using epoxy as the adhesive. And this will do a much better job of holding it all together, with of course one other challenge. When epoxy is used as glue on these joints, just like regular, you're gonna have a little bit of squeeze out. The problem is that the epoxy penetration is deeper than glue would be, and so it stains all of the edges a little bit darker. So just to make things a little bit harder, I'm gonna use epoxy on the bottom half and glue on the top half of these pieces. Now that we've covered a few of the challenges in this chaotic pattern, it all leads to one thing: the final thickness of the panel. Because every time you cut these down and glue them up, there's always some high spots and low spots, and the seams have little ridges, and it's just a nightmare. And this is where these speed tool clamps come in handy. Most clamps provide pressure at each end, but these are 4-way pressure clamps, which means that they're not only being pushed together, but the bottom and top bars are providing pressure up and down to keep them uniform across the top, which means less planing to preserve the thickness. All right, so we're getting our first look at the chaotic pattern cutting board, butcher block, whatever we're calling it. And all I'm really trying to do with this is figure out if this is the level of chaotic that I want. And there's no right or wrong with this. It's mostly just how bizarre you want the pattern to be. After one cut in each direction, this is looking pretty good, but I think one more will make it look much better. So with the first cut being long ways and the second one being the shorter length, I'm gonna go back to cutting long ways. And the benefit to doing one more cut like this, beyond just the design aspect, is really twofold. The first is that it'll get me one more glue up that'll be edge grain to edge grain, which will help lock in that last glue up, which was end grain to end grain. It basically just makes everything stronger. And secondly, the smaller these pieces are, the less surface area they have, which means less movement. And because the orientation of all these little pieces is in so many directions, if they start to expand and contract, it's gonna be bad news. So the smaller the better in this scenario. All right, earlier I said that the thickness of this panel is the most important part of this entire chaotic pattern thing. And remember, this is all made so difficult because the edge grain has to stay on the outside, so I can't cut these to whatever thickness I want and turn them on their edge. And this also dictated the fact that I had to use so much epoxy to do edge grain glue ups. And even after all that, you may be asking, why does the thickness of the board matter so much? Some of you may have already realized this, but I'm happy to tell you now. The thickness of the butcher block has to match the thickness of this, the slab. And yes, of course, I'm gonna flatten both of them in a minute, but I can't have either one sticking up higher than the other. Speaking of this slab, it feels really odd that I'm just now starting on it. It's usually the first thing that I do. Luckily, this one is in pretty good shape and doesn't need too much work. At least it didn't seem like it. Also, anytime that I mention that I ordered these slabs online, I often get asked where they're from. Now, this is not sponsored, but this one is from Alderfer Lumber in Pennsylvania. So I sort of hinted at this earlier, that this slab wasn't really that much work to clean up, and that's only kinda true. It's really common and almost impossible to find a white oak slab of this size without a bunch of cracks running down the grain. But if you remember, one of the things that really bothered my brother and sister-in-law about their current table were all those cracks where things get caught. So I'm taking the Dremel to all the cracks and checks to try to make them a little bit bigger, which makes it easier for the epoxy to penetrate. And as you'll see later, this kind of worked. I mean, the big cracks and voids were really no problem, but it's all those tiny little ones where the air pockets form and the epoxy just can't quite get to. You know what the epoxy can get through, though? Oh, no.
What? Is it stuck?
Yeah.
With the epoxy?
Yeah.
That's what
All right, it's finally time for me to flatten both of these pieces and get them to the same thickness. Now, luckily, I made my slab flattening bed very wide and also not wide enough. So yet again, cutting this slab down even further to make it workable. As I was getting set up for this process, for some reason in my head, I thought it was going to be pretty quick and easy. I didn't have that much material to remove on either piece, or at least I thought, and neither piece was all that big. But as I should have learned by now, nothing is ever that easy. As you can see, flattening slabs is a super messy job. And the hose in the desk collection works pretty well, but it's really the shroud that keeps the dust chips from flying all over the place. But really, that just means that they usually end up falling between the slats of the flattening bed, and it leaves this. In the past, I would just wipe it on the floor like I did here, which is really inefficient. Then a company that's focused on clean workshops and better workflows probably took exception to this method of cleanup and sent me their retractable hose vacuum system. It's wall-mounted, reaches my entire shop, and makes cleanup so easy. Thanks, Giraffe Tools. My brother is finally here so I can show him what I've come up with and he can make a decision on whether this is too crazy or just enough. Obviously, we've got the chaotic pattern cutting board butcher block thing matching right up to the slab. Is it too much?
No, I don't think so. I think the question becomes, do you want to have this kind of light strip running through here, or do you want it to be more seamless? I think it actually is a nice, like, visual break between this and the chaos. But the question is, when you have to try to clean up this live edge, so how much can you keep?
That's exactly the problem. There's two things that we have to think about when it comes to keeping this sapwood. The first is that a lot of it along the edge is super brittle.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that this live edge on the side is angled down like this.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to go far enough back into this piece to where we can get a flat edge along here for this to butt up against.
So you basically have to take it down to where it's straight vertical, but you're gonna follow the natural flow.
Right.
So half an inch maybe?
Well, if you look at where that is,
So maybe we might lose all of it.
you might lose all of that. So you can see how angled this is and how just like brittle that is.
So you essentially are gonna have to cut back to here.
Right. Yep.
I think I would like to see the line in between.
Yeah.
I think Amelia would rather it just be like kind of
more
like a seamless
seamless
thing where you, like
Yeah.
you don't even notice the chaotic thing unless you like walked up to it and
Right.
actually looked at it.
It is a totally different look between the two pieces, but it's subtle enough to where it's not like a big contrast.
Yeah. I think the other thing that makes it more difficult to envision is until it's got a finish on it,
Yeah.
you just don't know what life is going to come out of the wood until it's finished.
100%.
So it's hard to understand what that transition is going to
Yeah.
look like. So you have to flip it upside down to see where you need to cut?
You want to cut it to match the grain at the top and just move it back to how far you think you need to go.
So how do you cut that?
Well, let's find out. All we have to do now is trace that live edge, and then we'll cut it out to make the master template.
So we trace, then you take what you traced, cut it off, set it on there, draw it again, cut it.
You don't draw, you actually use this as
as
the
the
template.
guide?
Yeah, as the guide, yep. So we're obviously left with like a pretty jagged line, but all that we're really trying to do is get the general shape. So now we're gonna go back and take that shape. We'll make it a little bit flowier and natural looking. Let's flip this thing back over and put the template on and see if we like it.
So you clamp this down.
Tape it, but yes, same idea.
And that router is going to go cut deep enough to cut through that whole slab?
We'll have to do multiple passes in different ways to clean it all up.
Okay.
But the very first pass is going to be like 1/8 of an inch because we just want a really good
See the line.
clean edge. Yeah.
All right, well, I did this all weekend last weekend, so I'll let you do this one.
Okay. Well, all that I'm doing right now is cutting off the excess.
Yeah.
My blade just has to stay off the outside of this inside edge. I do want it to be close because whatever I leave, I have to remove. You want to do it?
Yep.
It's kind of like when you're running. Like, I don't know if you check your distance when you're running.
Try not to.
Yeah. I'm like, am I halfway done? Am I 3/4 of the way done? I think I'm done. I don't know. I hopefully I'm there. Don't look back. Don't look forward. Just keep cutting.
We just cut this whole thing off. How's it look?
Great.
Should I stop filming now?
Are you really there?
Good job.
Huh?
Good job.
I didn't do anything.
Working alone in the shop tends to be my preferred method of getting things done, but that was so much fun to have a little bit of help in the shop with my brother. And while he's not specifically a woodworker, he's definitely done a lot of projects and is capable of doing pretty much anything. If you enjoyed this portion of the video and would like to see more guests in the shop, use the words Big Brother in a comment below. Alright, as many of you know, I like to sketch out my projects, but when it comes to the table legs, I always have the most difficult time trying to picture what they're actually going to look like in real life. So lately I've been going to this, where I draw out the actual leg in real size. This not only gives me the ability to make changes on the fly as I see needed, because this is the only way that I know how to make angles and proportions come to life the way that I visualize them. Plus, I needed a template anyway. Now that I've got my leg template cut out and the materials to build the legs, I'm gonna have to do a little bit of trial and error to figure out exactly how I'm gonna configure those pieces to make this shape. And the reason why this is so difficult is because instead of using two pieces with an angled cut and one joint, I'm going to use 3 different pieces and have a joint here and here. I don't want a joint where the highest point of stress is on the leg. So by breaking it into multiple pieces, it actually becomes much stronger. Now I just have to figure out how I'm going to do that. My brain is starting to hurt from all the different angles and things that I've tried and tested, and I know this probably looks a little bit weird because I'm going to glue it up before I shape it, but taking into account the grain directions and the joints, I basically had to make a choice. I could either use the grain direction for the strength of the leg, or I could try to keep the joints as close to parallel to the ground as I could. And I decided to go for the stronger joints, which means that there's no weird angles to use gravity against these joints. Now, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this, but there's going to be 6 legs in total, so now all that I have to do is start cutting. Once I figured out all the angles that these pieces needed to be cut at, it wasn't too big of a deal to get them prepped. But I still have so many steps in this process that I can't stop thinking about how I'm going to clamp them, and even worse, how I'm going to template route with some of these grain directions. But before I can do anything, I need to cut out the tenons on the bottom piece, because that's how I'm going to attach this to the base. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, first I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot to me. If you're not new around here, also thank you for watching, but you may have also noticed by now that my family tends to end up in quite a few of my videos. This one obviously being no exception to that, and the reason for it is that family is just really important to me, and this may be normal for some and odd for other people, but I spend so much time with my family. Now, it helps that my brother's kids are also best friends with my kids, and we have family dinner at my parents' house every Friday night. Also, my brother and I are pretty close in age and have a lot of similar interests. When we were kids, we shared a bedroom, even though we didn't have to. I have no clue how I tricked him into that one. As we got older, we both fell in love with basketball and literally spent every waking moment of our childhood playing the sport. In high school, he wore the number 20, and of course, when it was my turn, there was no way I was picking any other number to wear. We lived together for a while in college, and I even picked the same major as him. For a lot of things in my life, I wanted to be just like my older brother. But now, I think I would prefer to keep my hair. Also, my sister-in-law and my wife are best friends. They actually live together in college, and we've sort of all just been hanging out for like 20 years now. Pair all of that with the fact that they live like 5 minutes away from us, and it's basically a dream scenario, at least for a little brother. Anyway, I think all I'm trying to say is that family and close friends are really important, and if you have the opportunity to spend time with them, do it while you can. Alright, back to the project where these table legs are actually coming together pretty nicely. When I first started with this design, I was pretty concerned about how strong that they would be because they had to hold a pretty heavy tabletop. But thankfully, the 3-piece design paid off, and these things are way stronger than I imagined. If you're wondering why I'm waiting until now to make this cut, it's that I can use the bottom of this registered against my fence to make sure that I'm getting a perfectly parallel cut along the top. This is the second to last thing that I have to do for these legs. So once I cut all 6 down, I can take it back to the router table and put the round over edge profile on each leg. After literally days of epoxy mixing, clamping, template routing, the legs are finally done, and I can turn my attention to getting them mounted in the base. You've already seen that I've cut a tenon in the bottom of each leg. Now it's time for me to clear the material to make the mortises that the legs will go in on this top disc. And here's how I plan to do it. First, I've got to take a bunch of measurements all around the circle so that I can get 6 perfectly placed mortises. And from there, it's to the 3D printing software so that I can create a template and print it out on my Bamboo Labs 3D printer. I'm using a brass bushing and a 1/2-inch router bit to clear most of the material. Wait, hold everything. We got to fix that mistake from earlier. So once I have that set up, I can place the template exactly where it needs to go and start removing material. And by lowering the bit little by little, I can clear everything out and I've got a perfect mortise. And then I just have to do it for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, And 6th leg. Another theme that seemed to be woven throughout this project was my intentionality when it comes to the structural integrity of the piece. Now, this is something that's important in everything that I build, but when it comes to the weight of the tabletop and the challenge of all of it coming down right in the center of the pedestal base, I knew it was going to be a challenge, which is why it not only dictated the 3 separate pieces that I had to make the legs out of, but also how I attached them to the base. So is a tenon this large at 1/8 and an inch deep enough? Sure it is, but eventually I'm gonna have to eat at this table, and I wanna make sure that when I put my weight on it to stand up, it doesn't wiggle or move at all. The final step to get this base completely finished is connecting the only 2 remaining pieces that I have left. Now, if you remember, when I cut these 2 pieces into circles, I drilled a hole perfectly in the center that I put a nail in and used on the circle cutting jig to make the circle. And the beauty of that is I can use each of these holes to line things up perfectly. All that I have to do is drill these holes out a little bit, and I can use a dowel, flip the base over, and just drop the bottom ring directly on. So much work has gone into finally getting to this point because it is time to glue up the tabletop. Now, I've already got the 2 pieces together, and the first thing that I'm gonna do is mark and cut for some dominoes. Now, I know most people say that dominoes don't really add any strength and they're mostly for alignment. Most of the time I would agree with that, and honestly, it's probably still true today. Then because of the odd shape of these 2 pieces and the size of the table, I'm gonna have to get a little bit creative with my clamp up situation. So I'm gonna cut into each of these pieces to give my clamps something to hold on to, which should really help keep the joint tight and strong. All right, this glue up definitely had me stressed out. And not just because of all the moving parts and the difficulty in clamping it, but this was the piece I had to nail. The piece that made this whole project so unique. This has to be the part of the design that catches your eye and makes you think custom furniture. And I don't mean in the sense of expensive or rare or designer. I just mean in the way that no one else has this exact same table. That's really the part that I love about custom furniture. Building something that in some way is different than anything else out there, and hopefully finding someone that also likes it. Okay, we are well over 30 minutes into this thing, so if you're still watching, I can assume that either you're enjoying what you're watching or you're just one of my older brother's friends supporting his kid brother. Either way, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe. It helps me a ton. You may have noticed while I was cutting out the circle that on the bottom side of the table, the 2 pieces don't match up perfectly. And while the top is a seamless joint, I've got a little bit of work to do here. Now, I can tell you that I am 100% certain that it had nothing to do with my poor jigsaw cutting skills, and it was probably something to do with the line that my brother drew on the template. Can't be certain, but I think it's pretty obvious. Anyway, this is not the end of the world. It actually gives me an opportunity to pour some epoxy into these cracks and strengthen the bond even more. And this isn't the only surprise that I have planned for the bottom of the table. You guys know how I'm building you a new table?
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe you guys could help me with something. Do you think maybe you could help me surprise your mom?
Like what?
Yeah, like what? All right. I was thinking you guys could write your name on the bottom of the table, and then we'll fill it with a color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hey, but if it's gonna be a secret, we can't tell mommy about it until the
Okay.
table's done.
Okay.
Can you guys keep it a secret?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Hey!
Dude!
Absolutely.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
All right, you guys ready?
That's the
Yeah.
deal.
Do you think you can write your name up here?
Yeah. How do you think?
Oh, much bigger.
No. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, so you're up.
Okay.
There you go. Now, I know I talked a lot about custom furniture and how special it is to me, but honestly, taking it one step further to personalize it when I get the opportunity is really special. Now, luckily here I was going for the handwritten look, so it didn't have to be perfect, but after routing it quickly, I could then fill it with the color epoxy that they chose. And I tried to wait until as long as I could to get this done. Let's see if they can keep the secret. Most people have heard that the last 10% of a project takes the longest, and it's obviously accurate. There are so many small details that you have to take care of to bring all of these pieces together and make it work right. First of those things is figuring out how I'm going to mount the tabletop to the base. Usually I wouldn't want this to have any structural significance. However, if we go back to this theme of doing most of the things over the top, this definitely falls in line. I'm not worried about the table wobbling or breaking or collapsing. The real engineering challenge is keeping the base from twisting. Because when someone leans on it, they aren't pushing straight down, and that creates a twisting force that wants to rotate the top of the table. But with these 6 mounting plates, it unifies the base as one, preventing all the pressure from being placed on a single leg. Also in the category of optional is C-channel. Ultimately, the reason why I included it on this table was because of the size of the slab. Does it actually prevent warping and twisting? I have no clue. But since the slab portion of this table is almost 40 inches, I figured it was worth it. In fact, usually I would install these much earlier, but unfortunately I had to wait for a new router bit to show up in the mail because the one that I needed to use was... well, you saw what happened. Okay, so after installing these with bolts and inserts, just like the mounting plates, it's on to edge profiles. And I'm going to stick with the roundover theme here, but this is the biggest one I'll use. And then it's right back to another recurring theme. If you remember earlier, I tried to make these cracks a little bit wider with the Dremel so that the epoxy could penetrate them properly. And as you can see, that did not happen. And this is a perfect use case for CA glue. Now, I'm lucky that Total Boat sent me all 3 of their CA glues, which help plug all of these little cracks. So no more toothpicks. So here we are. The last pesky 10% down to just 1%. Multiple hours of sanding distilled into these few seconds for you, of course. Then to the final step, getting some finish on this thing. Lately, on all of my lighter wood projects, I've chosen 5% white from Rubio Monaco, and it's a fantastic finish that keeps the white oak from turning to that orangey color. And this one in particular turned out so awesome because those lighter colors really stuck to the grains. Not something that I would usually desire, but in this scenario, it just works. It keeps the top looking really uniform. As I've mentioned a few times now, I'm not an epoxy hater. I'm not even a river table hater. This sort of a project where you have a large slab that doesn't quite fit exactly what you need is prime for doing an epoxy project. In fact, one thing that epoxy does is allow you to keep the natural shape and edge of a slab, while simultaneously pairing it with the least natural of materials. And I don't think that's wrong. I just think this is better. But what do you think about it? And more importantly, what do my brother and sister-in-law think about it?
Yeah, I like these dark in there.
Yeah.
We've got a surprise for you. Look on the...
Aww. That is so cute. It is cute. Oh my goodness. That's adorable.
I didn't see the finished product. What do you think?
I love it. It's beautiful.
That's what you expected?
Are you gonna put that cover
Yeah, it's
back
better
on
than I
it?
expected.
I hope you enjoyed watching this video at least half as much as I enjoyed making it. I'm always worried about sounding arrogant, but honestly, I don't think I've seen anything quite like this table, and I'm really proud of it. And I have yet to say this on this channel yet, but I think that this might be my best.
If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching my video. If you would like and subscribe and leave a comment, that's huge to help me grow my channel. And if you like this video, here's 2 more that you can check out, and we'll catch you in the next one.